Welcome to our first webinar in a series from the Muslim Reform Movement. I'm president and founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. We'll be recording this event for all of you to share with family and friends. And as I convene the webinar, I just want to give you all some rules. Everybody's been muted who's a guest, so we won't have the ability to chat back and forth, but you can use the chat space to type any comments and any questions that you might have. So we'll try to look at those as we move through the meeting, and especially at the last 10 minutes. We're looking for the speakers to last about 30 minutes, each of us 5-7 minutes with the four of us, and then 5 minutes to wrap up, and then we'll spend 10-15 minutes looking at the chat to address all of your concerns. We have three panelists, including myself, Arif, and Soraya, and Courtney will introduce them shortly. Courtney will be our moderator and sort of master of ceremonies. She is an enthusiastic, compelling, participatory facilitator who engages the diverse perspectives and of her stakeholders in meaningful dialogue to elicit inspired action and thoughtful working groups. She's been a facilitator with us for a number of years. She's been one of the leaders in the Muslim Reform Movement, and we've been blessed to have her on our team. She's led several nonprofits and grassroots initiatives and is a skilled graphics artist. She is a applied cultural anthropologist and professional facilitator for participatory processes. So that's the ground rules. I'm going to turn it over to Courtney, who'll sort of lay out what our general overview is, and then we'll go on with our program. Courtney.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Zudi, and welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here today and see what your comments and your questions are as we move forward. As Zudi mentioned, you have members of the Muslim Reform Movement, and our topic today is countering Islamist supremacist culture, Europe on the brink. We are going to, I'll take some time here to give us a quick overview of our time and to introduce our panelists, and then we will hear from them. And if there are additional questions or comments, we'll see if we can get to them. But if not, we will utilize them for future webinars. So thank you so much for your time and energy on this very important topic that is near and dear to our souls and is really about building our collective dignity and humanity across our globe. So I will go ahead and introduce our panelists, and then we will get a chance to hear from them. Topic again, which is countering Islamist supremacist culture, Europe on the brink. And it is, we want to thank American Islamic Forum for Democracy for bringing us together today. Here is an overview of some of the key threads from the Muslim Reform Movement. One of the ideas is that ideas do not have rights. Human beings have rights. And this is a larger systemic work against an ideology that is based on, that has supremacist attributes. So we're going to get into those supremacist attributes today, but we want you to see where our website is. It's MuslimReformMovement.org. We're on Facebook and Twitter. Please follow us, like us, join the conversation. There's three key components of our declaration, which really outlines we're a broader group of folks from every continent across the globe, diverse perspectives, insights, but we all agree on the Muslim Reform Movement Declaration, and that's around human rights, freedom of speech, and freedom to offend, and secular governance. Thank you. This is a part of our work, is healing our humanity through a revolution of our hearts and minds, rebuilding our collective dignity and our humanity. It's a global movement. So we're happy that you are participating with us. It takes all of us. It's not just Muslims, it's our neighbors, understanding what it is that we're up against. So supremacy attributes. Now, they're not just a part of what we're dealing with the Islamist extremist ideology. You might come across these supremacist attributes in other aspects of your life with different cultures and different groups of people. But we have found in this our current climate here in America, particularly, of addressing supremacist attributes in the institutions and the systems that perpetuate them, which is really the people, their hearts and their minds and their perspectives and their values, that these are common threads that we've been up against for a very long time here as key leaders of the Muslim Reform Movement. So we thought this slide would be a nice frame for us to move forward with our conversation on how to affect these these triangles you see here on the side. And this is also on our Facebook page, so you can look at it again for future reference. So while we're looking at this slide, I could go ahead and introduce our panelists that we have today, and then they will get a chance to tell you about the work that is near and dear to their souls, and how what we're facing here currently, and how you can participate in that, so you can get a broader understanding of what the Muslim Reform Movement is really working towards. So up first, we're going to have Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He's the founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and he's author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. On March 20th, 2012, Dr. Jasser was appointed by the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. He served 2 terms, both as a commissioner and as a vice chair, until May of 2016. And we want to thank Zuhdi and the American Islamic Forum for Democracy for sponsoring this webinar. We also have Soraya Dean. She's a lawyer, an interfaith consultant, and an expert on nonviolent communication, dialogue, conflict resolution, and peacemaking. She's a fellow and faculty of the Omnia Institute for Contextual Leadership, and she works directly with communities and women impacted by violent extremism. Soraya joined the Muslim Reform Movement Coalition in 2019 and has been a very strong supporter of our efforts. And then we will also hear from Arif Humayun. He's a founding member of the Muslim Reform Movement, and he's a senior fellow with the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Arif developed interest in comparative religion while living in Australia from 1989 to 92. And his first book, The Summit of Religious Evolution, was published in 1992, which established the common bonds between the Semitic faiths. His latest book, Connivance by Silence, discusses how the majority's failure to challenge politically motivated misinterpretations of the Quran empowered radicals to propagate radicalism. So we are going to hear from these 3 esteemed activists and scholars who have spent a lot of their time and energy in not only working on research, but also helping to communicate with those of us that may not understand the depth of this work that we are up against. So with that, I will go ahead and pass off to Zuhdi.
Thank you. Thank you, Courtney. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. This topic today is near and dear to our heart because it really runs at the core of why we're here. And I know we want to take a little time to introduce all of us to you because many of you may not be familiar with some of our work, and you will hopefully afterwards look us up and start to look at some of the work. We're very diverse. We look at diversity as being about difference of ideas from right to left, from different perspectives and cultures, etc. So diversity to us is not about identity politics. It's not about racial diversity or ethnic, but rather ideological diversity. So the topic today, for those who have not been paying attention just simply to the COVID issue and the pandemic, but to some of the social cultural phenomena of what's happening globally, Europe has been on the brink, and that's not an exaggeration. France and especially Austria have been confronting political Islam, Islamism, and the flashpoints, if you will, of conflict. So we thought it's about time that we get together with all of you and begin to have a conversation about what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, what are the problems, what are the diagnoses, and what are the treatments. I have run the American Islamic Forum for Democracy now for almost 15 years, and our foundation was based on not countering terrorism, but countering political Islam. And the belief is that political Islam is the root cause of radicalization. And you'll find this week the reason Samuel Paty's name should have been on the top of the most important stories of 2020, but it wasn't. Samuel Paty is a teacher who France this past few months has had a trial of 14 individuals that were found to be supporting ISIS during the Charlie Hebdo attacks. You'll see a mural there on a building that announced that not only are we all Samuel Pady, but they supported the magazine's rights to draw graphics of the Prophet and criticize Islam, because it's one of the essences of being free in our society is freedom of speech. Not too many people, unfortunately, heard about what happened to Samuel Pady. He was beheaded by an ISIS radical. He was teaching his students about the importance to understand the need for freedom of speech, and distributed the cartoons. And then after his killing, President Macron began a cultural and political and societal addressal, if you will, of the problems related to Islamic separatism. And I have to tell you, as somebody who's been fighting this issue for most of my life, it was refreshing to finally see a Western leader identify Islamic separatism. He's done it before, but basically began having a full-on campaign nationally against Islamist separatism. And I think it's important that we lift that up. Now, there still was a lot of pushback. There's a lot of apologetics. This week in the Washington Post, there was a piece by one of the Muslim Brotherhood apologists and Qatari operatives, if you will. Her name is Karen Atiyah. She wrote a piece about how far to the right Macron has swung, and basically blaming the French for what's happening to them, and some of the same, I think, insulting mechanisms that prevent real reform that's necessary. Now, there have been demonstrations in France on both sides of this issue, if you will. We don't see it as two sides. You know, in French, this says French and Muslim. We are French and Muslim, proud of both identities. So, do I agree with that? I have to tell you, one of our problems we see, there's four I's I talk about: identity, Islamism or political Islam, ijtihad, which Arif is going to talk about, which is modern interpretation of Muslim scripture, and the last one is oh my gosh, it's escaping me, but it'll come back to me. Ideology. So ideological interpretation, modern interpretation, political Islam, and identity. These I's, if you will, are important to focus on as we look at solutions. So the French president was getting it right on diagnosis, was not getting it right on treatment. Why did he not get it right? Well, they started to talk about engaging Muslims in this issue that are really Islamists. So a lot of the folks that they still are engaging are folks that believe in political Islam, and I want to walk you through what that is. But also in Austria, we saw some similar conflict happen, and I know these tweets are a little blurry, but the bottom line is there were some very important comments coming from the Chancellor of Austria, Sebastian Kurz, who said just a few weeks ago, in the fight against political Islam, we will create a criminal offense called political Islam in order to be able to take action against those who are not terrorists themselves, but who create the breeding ground for such. And then he said there will be further possibilities for the closure of places of worship, the introduction of an imam register, the symbol and association law will be tightened, and measures will be taken to drain financial flows of terrorist financing. So a lot of this, actually, some of that I've been in favor of. Stopping foreign financing, making sure imams are not foreign agents, or having them register under Foreign Agency Registration Acts, etc. But taking an idea and outlawing it is not only is it proven to not work, I think in the American example, that's what we're trying to do in the Muslim reform movement, is show, if you look, for example, we fight hate groups like Nazis, the KKK, and others, not by outlawing them, but there was a Supreme Court case that basically outlined the fact that as long as they're not imminently preaching for violence, Brandenburg versus Ohio, the court said, as long as the KKK isn't imminently preaching active acts of terror or violence or criminality or murder, that they have a right to say these things, as heinous and as offensive as it might be. And I think you'll find in every country, be it Egypt, Syria with ISIS, Iran with the post-Shah Khomeinism, Turkey with AKP that came after 80 years of pushing the Islamist underground, every country that pushes Islamists underground so they can't be monitored ends up having to deal with a massive movement that they weren't able to monitor. So I think it's important to realize that not only is it unconstitutional to do that in America, the European countries, they do have hate speech laws. They do have things that are different from America, but I think that will not work and will only radicalize and create a bigger separatism of what they're actually trying to fight. Last, I think if you look at what we're doing in the Muslim reform movement, there's a quote from Emerson in which he said there are always two parties, the party of the past and the party of the future, or the establishment and the movement. I think regardless of what you think of the political partisanship in America, there is definitely a significant, strong move against the establishment, regardless of what side you're on. And also that establishment has proven to just want to stay in the past rather than look to the future. We in the Muslim Reform Movement are looking to the future. It is important that you understand what political Islam is. Kurtz and Macron got it right. It is the cancer. It is a theocratic movement, an ideology that bases adherence to state law on their religious identity, be it the Khomeinis in Iran, like you see at the top there, or the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They are, we believe, violent organizations. They sometimes will espouse nonviolence, and Kurtz said that he wants to somehow, even if it's nonviolent, outlaw it. Well, yes, there's a conveyor belt from the nonviolent portions to the violent, but the bottom line is that is not going to work in countering them. This is sort of the Islamist mafia, the heads of Islamic countries, if you will. There's corporate Islamists that are the kings and the rulers that create their Sharia courts, if you will. And then there's grassroots Islamists of the movements like the Muslim Brotherhood, the Khomeinis, the Jamaat Islamiyya, etc. So now with immigration and the millions into Europe, they're dealing with sort of a sonic boom of this problem. They're finally beginning to address it in some ways much better than we even are in the United States, as we're still mired in apologetics on Islamism. But even with that, they're having a sonic boom of a clash of cultures and civilizations that I think needs to be addressed through Muslim reform, with us being in the offense for American and Western ideas of secular liberal democracy. Our declaration, as Courtney says, outlines some of the principles that we believe in, and we'll walk through some of that later in this session. But this is what should be on the tip of the tongue of leaders like Kurtz and Macron and others about what we should advocate for. You're always hearing what they're against political Islam, against Islamism, fine. But what are we for? How do we engage those communities? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zudi. Please, those of you that are present with us today, please add your comments into the chat or any questions of clarity you have as we move forward. We now have the opportunity to hear from Soraya Dean. So Soraya, please take the stage.
Thank you, Courtney. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, I can hear you and see you.
Oh, fantastic! Because I can see and no, I cannot see neither of you. So, you know, when I was doing some fundamental work around Islamists and Islamism, my mentor asked me, Soraya, do you know which is the richest place, which is the richest land in the world? And I was thinking deeply, coming from California, I thought it was Bel Air or Beverly Hills. And he said, it is the grave. And I was wondering why he said that, because he said they are the place where men and women are buried with their gifts. And as a Muslim woman, I wanted to add an adjective to that, Muslim women's graves, because that is where there's no opinion of the Muslim woman, lies a woman whose no opinion was never heard, whose choice was never allowed, and her voice was eternally stifled, and that is in our places of worship. So for a long time, what we all see is the Islamists have used God as a tool to suppress free speech and women's rights. My journey into activism began when my son was called a terrorist and bullied. So I went deep into America. I traveled across America trying to bridge this deficit and bring communities together. In fact, 5 years ago, I went to Portland. I traveled 1,000 miles and met 1,000 American people. And when I left, there was an article in the newspaper that said, "Meet Soraya, a true American Muslim." And when I came back to my community, what I felt was that I was not welcome in the mosque. I was told what to think and not how to think. And there began my journey into exploring the stifling, the mistreatment, the discrimination of the Muslim women. And that is when I founded the Muslim Women Speakers Movement. And my work has taken me across the globe, I would say, in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and in Nigeria. I've done phenomenal work empowering women. So in Sri Lanka, through the facts that I am currently finding the causes and consequences. For instance, in Sri Lanka last year in 2019, about 8 bombers got together and they bombed Christian churches and special places of interest in the city of Colombo and suburbs. 270 people died. And this was the rise of Islamism. And it just didn't rise overnight. And I'm here to say, assert that Saudi Arabia has a foreign policy where they fund international, the spreading of Wahhabism internationally. And the tentacles of Saudi Arabia had reached Sri Lanka. And here you see there the carnage, the destruction that has been caused. In fact, Saudi Arabia, in the years 2011 to 2013, Saudi donated to India $600 million to build mosques, spread Wahhabism in India. And what this did was, for me, I began to realize that this is not right. The critique of Islam has been stifled. And today I consider anybody who critiques Islam as a real, true and genuine friend, because we Muslims, we can't censor ourselves anymore. So having I want to talk about moral reciprocity, something that is totally lacking in our community. We have failed to address Islamist terrorism and Islamism, the political Islam. My phone is singing. Am I on time? Okay. So the question to ask is, how can we not put our house in order first? Dr. King preached this very vehemently. He told the African Americans during the civil rights movement, he told them 2 things. One is, go within and explore yourself as to what needs to be fixed in the community. And then he also called on the African Americans to look at the larger picture of the magnificence of America, which we don't see happening in any of the countries that Zudi referred to. Religion has become a measure of loyalty, and this has to stop. So forums like this, that we can address this issue and call out on the Islamist movements to really take ownership for this, for their silence, and the perpetuation of the violence is really critical. And wherever I have traveled, friends, I have noticed there's one thing that is happening deliberately and purposefully, and that is the suppression of the Muslim woman. In Nigeria, polygamy is rampant. I remember when I traveled first to Nigeria, a man picked me up, and I asked him how his family was and how are his children, and he said that he had 15 children. And these are the children who were later indoctrinated into terrorists and Boko Haram and all of that. And in Bangladesh, you will see that child marriage is rampant. 52% of girls are married under the age of 18 and 27 under the age of 15. So I don't know, my screen is not very clear. Maybe I'm out of time.
No, it's your closing thoughts, Soraya. Just
okay.
Your closing thoughts on that. Yeah.
So my closing thoughts are the empowerment of Muslim women. These are the women who had to be stakeholders moving forward. In the Muslim women speakers movement, what we are addressing is anti-Semitism and discrimination, Islamophobia, and I don't even know what Islamophobia means anymore, because all the countries we live in are secular and religious based, but they give us enough freedom to operate. And I cannot see why there is this term Islamophobia that stifles criticism of Islam is upheld by so many fractions, even within the United States. This is a tragedy, and the message is loud and clear. Do not do this, because we Muslims have to correct what is wrong, put our house in order. So my final thought would be that that as we work through this patiently, be patient with us, and then of course push us and support the work of the reformists, because we are the first to receive the bullet from the majority Muslim communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soraya. That was very helpful and insightful. And now we are going to hear from Arif Humayun. So Arif, please.
Well, thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Zudi and Soraya, for laying the foundation for what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to just hit the nail over the head and identify the real issues that give birth to this radical ideology and how this radical ideology has been developed, which is a total opposition or total conflict with the religion of Islam. I started researching on this topic about more than 30 years ago, as Zudi said, when I went to Australia. And I'm just going to be very sort of try to focus on the ideology that is causing the problems. Islam has been maligned not only by the non-Muslims but by Muslim majority themselves because they failed to speak up against the radical doctrine that has permeated the Muslim societies. The reason for the Muslim silence is that they do not clearly understand the faith and they are not able to challenge the politically inspired ideologies that the radicalized clergy has proposed. And this happened just about 100 years ago after the First World War with the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman Caliphate. I'm going to focus most of my comments on the scripture because that is the undisputed source of Islamic teachings. Islamic teachings, as defined by the Quran and the Holy Prophets, is nothing but a message of peace. But can I have the next slide, please? The politicized clergy blends the engineered doctrine of Islamic State and abrogation of verses that do not support their cause, and that leads to the issue of radicalism and terrorism. And uh, as Muslims, we have to reject this ideology and return it back to the original message of Islam. The claiming of superiority and supremacy exclusively over other faiths and proclaiming that Islam is in danger leads to this feeling of victimization among Muslims. Have the next slide, please. Uh, I think the fundamental question that we should all ask ourselves is, what is the purpose of religion? In my view, as I understand from the scripture, the purpose of religion is a gradual transformation of our behavior and intellectual development from the basic instinctive stage where we are required to deal with absolute justice to the moral stage where we are required to deal with other people with benevolence, and ultimately to the spiritual stage. Next slide, please. To the spiritual stage where our behavior should be of overwhelming benevolence. This is the crux of the religious teaching, and I would say for any religious teaching, it's not the ritualism that most people rely on. The five pillars of Islam, they serve as training tools for us to achieve these different stages. The first pillar is declaration, that means fulfilling your commitments. The second and third pillar are prayers and fasting, which essentially is to develop discipline in our lives by suppressing instincts of laziness and greed. The fourth pillar is the charity, which is helping the underprivileged people. And the fifth pillar is kinship, and that is demonstrated by the pilgrimage, where everybody from the world gets together and they are dressed the same. There's no distinction between rich and poor and so forth. Next slide, please. Let me talk about the root cause of this whole issue of radicalism. The concept of Islamic State that is defined by the radicals as a state exclusively for Muslims, run according to Sharia, where non-Muslims are treated as unequals. This concept is non-existent in Islam. And just for comparison, I've listed the Islamic concept of Islamic State on the left-hand column and that of the Islamism on the right, and you can see how different they are. This convoluted element of ideology was first proposed by Muslim Brotherhood in 1928 in Egypt, and about the same time in India by Jamaat Islami. And this forms the core of the radicalized ideology. They cite the model of the Prophet organizing the tribes in Medina, where he was invited by the warring factions to restore peace as example of the Islamic State. But they forget that the Prophet developed a constitution of Medina signed by all tribes which established a system of governance under which all citizens, including non-Muslims, enjoyed equal rights, agreed to jointly defend the city, ensure peace and justice, and pledge loyalty to the state. They were free to profess any faith and profess and choose any faith. By contrast, the political clergy insists that the establishment of Islamic State is a core principle of the interpretation of Islam, where women and non-Muslims will not have the same rights as Muslims. And then, due to sectarianism, there's infighting among the different Sunni and the different Shia groups, and between the Shia and Sunni groups, and so forth. They want to establish an Islamic State and demand that all Muslims declare loyalty to the mythical state and not to the state that they live in, especially if that country is ruled by non-Muslims. And this is one of the fundamental issues that the Muslims are conflicted about. They do not allow the freedom of thought as classified by blasphemy, and the freedom to choose religion as classified by apostasy. Both are considered, I'm out of time, both are considered.
Go ahead and finish your thought, Arif. Go ahead and finish your thought.
Okay, both are considered capital crimes. The radicals declare the state as a place of peace, and the non-Muslim state as a place of war, and the non-Muslim state has to be subdued by the Islamic State. So they talk about jihad and so forth, but I won't get into that because of time, and maybe we can cover that later. So let me stop here, and I think I've defined the main issue that is causing the radicalism among Muslims. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arif and Zudi and Soraya. And as a person who's been listening to your presentations, to sum up some pieces from my interpretation, is the Muslim reform movement is a group of people, a coalition, who have joined together to address and stop the growth of the Islamist state. And the Islamist state is a corrupt political movement based on a supremacist ideology. It uses Islam as its shield, and it is perpetuating world dominance and the supremacist attributes throughout our world. And what we have heard from today is Muslim leaders and activists who are calling out this issue, who are calling out this ideology. And as Soraya mentioned, one of the ways that it has been perpetuated and these extremists have played the victim card is by saying that there's Islamophobia. And you can't have bias against a group of beliefs. Ideas don't have rights. People have rights. And we should be able to talk about ideas. And here, all of us here have different perspectives and different ideas, but we all agree on basic human rights. And there is an organization of Islamic countries, of Muslim majority countries, that do not sign the United Nations Declaration, the 1948 United Declarations of Human Rights. And that is problematic. And we are seeing the Muslim supremacist ideology start to infiltrate into Europe, and it's happening here in the United States. I've experienced it in Phoenix, Arizona, through extreme rhetoric, and it has come out through hate and violence. And so that is what we are really calling your attention to, and we've got a lot of background on it. As you can see, Soraya's got world experience. Arif has gotten into the research of why it isn't Islam and why it is corrupt and the changes we need to make. And many of you know Zudi. He has been out on the front lines, calling out these issues, addressing them, being on the United States. I forget the United States Commission of International Religious Freedom, addressing religious atrocities across our globe through through the United States and the work. So these are all activists for our work. I have not seen a lot of succinct questions that we could answer. I'm going to go look at the comments again. But what I'm going to ask is for each of our panelists to make another statement, another one that kind of sums up what we've been talking about and brings out a call to action on what we can do as people who want to support the Muslim reform movement. So Zudi, if you could go first.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I wanted to make sure people realize. Listen, folks, we understand this is only our first webinar on this. To a lot of you that may not have seen us review some of this before. And we also want you to understand, we get the fact that some of what you may hear us say sounds like apologetics about Islam. But the bottom line is if you look at what Europe is facing, they are not going to be able to defeat this by simply telling everybody that the prophet's interpretation is medieval or is the prophet's practice of Islam was militant. So if we are going to maintain our Islamic identity, and if you're going to want to work with folks that can be on the offense within the Muslim community, I would think that consider it mythology. I saw some of the comments in the, there's some great questions in there about abrogation and, how can we abrogate anything? Well, at the end of the day, I will tell you that I believe the Wahhabis are the ones that are abrogating all the peaceful verses that come before the final ones that talk about war. We can go down the rabbit hole of jihad, etc., and Arif was going to talk about some of that. But the bottom line is that we as feel that our ultimate loyalty, the only country that I would ever die for is America. The only military that I'd ever work for, and I did for 11 years, is the U.S. military. I'd never worked for a Muslim military or an Islamic war. That concept needs to be put into the dustbin of history. And only Muslims can defeat that, just like the American founding fathers defeated Christian theocracy and the establishment of the church mixed with government. We want to somehow, through our Muslim reform movement and our declaration, bottle that so that we can begin to transform the Muslims that are moving into the West are divided into different groups. Some are Islamists, they're long gone. The 70% that are not need some type of engagement to prove that so that we can begin to take the platform back of Islam. So yes, it's going to be very easy to dissect a lot of the things we might say as believers in our faith and say, wow, that's not what the predominant. We already submit to you that the establishment, the leaders of our faith are 98% Islamists, but the grassroots are not. The Arab awakening, as much of a failure it was, proved that the Islamists in Tunisia and Egypt and elsewhere do not dominate the community. They can because they're the most organized, but they're not a majority. They're a plurality, but not a majority. So as we look forward, we hope you can join us in some solutions and begin to raise questions, but realize that we have a version of Islam that has primary and sole loyalty to secular liberal democracies and their states and their militaries. And that's why some of that distinction, what Arif talked about, was so important, which is our Islam, we see it as peaceful. We don't, ever justify violence against anyone, but yet I was in the military, so I'm not anti-war. I just believe that ultimately it's a last resort. So, but I would only do so in an American military, and that's very important. And as they engage presidents and others across Europe, we're going to need to make sure that we engage a solution, not just diagnosing the problem.
Thank you so much, Zudi. And I think another comment on here. Oh, yes, okay. Sorry, I'm about to have you go. Another comment was around that many Muslims are even afraid to engage. And I would say that the Muslim reformers are civil rights leaders of our time. They are out there on the front lines having these conversations that we need to hold. So yeah, closing thoughts from you, Soraya?
Yes, really quickly, I know time is running out. I think terrorism and blasphemy laws are interconnected. And I know even though 84 countries have blasphemy laws, the blasphemy laws practiced in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, Iran are critically dehumanizing. So there has to be an international call to repeal and reform these blasphemy laws, because these laws, blasphemy and apostasy, they are oxygen, they fuel terrorism. And there needs to be an international call to abolish these laws. Take in deconstructing our received theology. The received theology. This means we don't need to go and tamper with the Quran. Quran, let it be as it is. But we need to give commentaries like the Talmud and the Torah to clarify certain passages in the Quran. That needs to take place. But what is essential is to educate the clergy, the Muslim clergy. Every country I've gone to, they have an understanding of a convoluted version of the text, but not the context. So we have to bring a bottom-up theology, not a top-down theology. Times have changed. We have to understand the contextuality. And this is what gives me fire and fuel to teach this and to share these skills with women. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Soraya. And I see that there's a lot more questions coming up in the chat, and that makes us so excited because those are future webinars that we can do. And so thank you for that, and please keep it going. And Arif, please let us know your closing thoughts and calls to action. Anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I just want to make one comment, and that's based on some of the questions, comments I've seen. The UN declaration, the US led the adoption, the drafting and the adoption of the declaration. And so the comment was not right that said US did not sign it. But the Muslim countries, all of them except Saudi Arabia, signed the declaration in 48, and then they reneged on it in 2000. And I just want to end my comment by saying that the Holy Quran supports every article of the UN Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the UN National General Assembly. And there is a book published on the topic, and that can be available to anybody who wants it. You know, and I'll share that book with you. So I just want to close there because this is a big misconception that Islam and the Holy Prophet were not peaceful people. Thank you.
Thank you, Arif.
Do we have a second round, Courtney?
No, I don't.
No.
I think this is good. I think this has been a good amount of time. We got into some content. We want to keep it shorter. Do them in little segments. We've got a lot of comments. So I would like to just pass off to Zudi. Any closing comments, calls to action before we close out with our time?
Yeah, some people asked how they can support us. Please go to our websites. There's two main websites. One is our organization, the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, AIFdemocracy.org. You can support us not only financially, but through your social networks. We need platforms. It's about time that when you turn on the news, when you turn on the television or look on social media, that you're not only getting the amplification of Islamist voices because of Ilhan Omar and their gang and others, but you get the amplification of voices of anti-Islamist, pro-liberty, pro-freedom Muslims. So connect with us on our Twitter platform, on Facebook, at each of our Facebook pages. You can find Courtney, myself, Ezra Nomani, Raheel Raza. There's a number of us, and we're going to have more webinars in the future. We're going to try to do this once a month and bring in and introduce you to a lot of the other individuals. Also go to MuslimReformMovement.org is our website for our coalition. That's a central place of our coalition where we post some of our work that a lot of us do at our own organizations. And then if you know partners that we can partner with, either not only in the Muslim communities, but in the Jewish communities, Christian communities, interfaith, human rights activists, secularists that are working so we can build large coalitions. One of the reasons the Islamists win is the non-Islamists and also those who are not Muslim don't work together in a coalition. We're so fragmented that the Islamists end up dominating the conversation. So find us on social media. If you have other webinars or platforms you'd like us to be a part of, please let us know. Or email info@democracy.org.
Yep, and we look forward to answering your questions in the future. That is definitely our intention. So thank you so much for your time and energy, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you.